and we're back in record time.
Welcome to another in a series of interviews with Harpswell residents called Voices of Harpswell. These interviews are part of Harpswell's celebration of Maine's bicentennial year. Good morning, Anne.
Good morning. How are you, Bob? Rob?
Very well. Please tell us your name.
I'm Anne Standridge. My father was Dr. Currier McEwen, who's well known in Harpswell. And what would you like me to talk about?
Well, I know your family has a long association with Harpswell going back many generations. Please tell us a little about that.
All right. Well, I'll tell you how we started. On my mother's side of the family, they encountered Maine in 1635. My mother's ancestors were coming to headed for the Massachusetts Bay Colony. They were shipwrecked during a storm in Pemaquid, and I think they never came back because it was not a pleasant experience for them. On the other hand, my father's side of the family, it's really a great story. It began because my grandmother wanted to go to college, and my great-grandfather said that was fine. But his wife, her mother, said absolutely not. Nice girls don't go to college. And apparently my grandmother went into a tailspin, and the doctor prescribed sea air. So Grandpa Currier got on a packet boat and headed down east looking for a place where his daughter could take the cure. And he got off in Portland and got on another packet boat and arrived in Harpswell. Now, the Auburn colony had been founded in the 1870s, about 1876, and Grandpa Currier walked up the hill and found the Auburn colony and decided that this would a place would do. So he rented a cottage there for the summer, and they had such a good time that he bought a cottage, and we've been coming ever since for the summers. My father loved it so much that after he retired, he moved to Maine. And he had his gardens at the house, so lots of people, maybe some of you, have visited them. And the display garden is still there, so it's in bloom right now.
Now, I know you came here every summer when you were a child. You came to the Auburn colony.
Yes, it was fun.
Now, so at that point, your family owned a cottage within the colony itself?
No, that was Grandpa Currier.
Okay.
And the red cottage in the colony is the cottage that belonged to my great-grandfather. Then Grandpa Currier helped my grandparents get the cottage that is right next to the tennis court. And that's where my father grew up. He did not want to join the colony because he was so busy doing other things, sailing, gardening, this sort of thing. And at that time, the colony the dining hall served 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. And Daddy didn't want to be tied to the dining hall schedule. So he did not join the colony. He became an associate member. And we've been associate members ever since. That must have been back, going back to maybe the 1930s or 40s.
And that cottage, if I'm not wrong, is still in your family, isn't it?
My cousin, Nancy Dorian.
And who is Nancy Dorian and her mother?
Well, Nancy's mother, Aunt Edith, was my father's sister. And they inherited the cottage from their parents. And at that point, my parents had a little farmhouse, an old farmhouse in Connecticut, where they could spend weekends. So my father thought it was only fair that Aunt Edith have the main cottage. And so it stayed on on the Dorian side of the family.
And the Dorians were from Newark, is that right?
Well, my father, my grandfather, and great-grandfather Currier, I think, started out in Amesbury, Massachusetts, and moved from there to Newark. And that's where the Curriers grew up. And Daddy grew up in Newark, New Jersey. His father was a doctor. He became a doctor. My brother Ewan is now a doctor. So it sort of runs in the family.
And one of my childhood memories is that even when he was on vacation up here in Harpswell, your father was kind of the de facto town doctor. Is that right?
Well, he was willing to, at that time, there weren't so many rules and medical rules. And people knew there was a doctor either up the road or across the street. So if somebody got sick or mildly hurt themselves, they came to Daddy and he took care of them. And then when he retired and moved to Maine, he practiced here for a while. He was a rheumatologist. And he practiced for a while. When he and Mommy retired to Maine, they discovered there was only one doctor, one rheumatologist really based in Portland for the whole state. So for several years, my father would take a week every month. He and my mother would travel around the state, going up to Fort Kent and coming down. They had a regular route and seeing patients who had rheumatic diseases. And he also helped get other rheumatologists into Maine, so then he didn't have to do that anymore.
And then I know his sister Edith was also an author, was she not?
Yes, and Edith was a wonderful writer. She wrote historical novels and some histories for upper elementary, middle school students that are really a lot of fun to read. She wrote a mystery called No Moon on Graveyard Head, which is based on the Graveyard Point in South Harpswell. And she wrote history. She wrote quite a well-known history that, at the time, called Hokahay, American Indians Then and Now, which was very popular. She also wrote a book called Trails West and the Men Who Made Them, plus some other young people's novels.
So what was it like as a young girl during the
Oh, it
summer
was
at
great.
Harpswell?
It was great. The colony was going strong then, and it was quite different from the way it is today. Back then, the people who lived in the colony owned their houses, and they came for the summer, and they stayed for at least a month, most of them for the whole summer. So the dining hall was serving 3 meals a day, and Walter Farley was the cook. During the winter, he cooked for one of the fraternity houses at Bowdoin, and in the summer he came down and he cooked for the colony. And it was just wonderful home-style cooking, nothing very fancy, but very tasty. And in the morning, every morning, he made fresh donuts. And when we were kids, we'd run over to the back door of the dining hall, and Walter would come out and give us all fresh donuts. And it was so good. They were still warm. It was just wonderful. Did you do that too, Rob?
I remember that. I definitely remember Walter.
Yeah.
Because he was there for many
years.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
along with a caretaker they called Gabe.
Gabe, yes.
Yeah. So eventually, did your father build that house across the road where you are now?
No, he bought it. The thing is that the house that he turned over full ownership to Aunt Edith had been left to both of them. And Aunt Edith insisted that it be shared. So they would come, that's the Dorians, would come for a month. My cousin Nancy Dorian, who owns it now, and her brother, cousin Don, and Aunt Edith and Uncle Don would come for a month, and then we would come for a month. And that wasn't very fun because we never got to see each other. We would just be passing like ships in the night. So first, my parents rented a house that was owned by the Danas, 3 houses down from the Dorian cottage. And we would come and spend the summer there. And at that time, the Estes lived across the street. Ruth Estes, Mary, Robert, and Paul Estes, and their mother, in the house that we have now. And we did that for several years, and then my mother and father decided that they should buy, and that house came up for sale. So it was kind of fun because we bought the house that the Estes had been using, and they started using the house that we'd been renting. And so we sort of swapped houses. And that's how we got the house we have now.
And that house is still a center of for your family when they come to
Oh,
Harpswell.
yes. Everybody comes. The house is very elastic. In the wintertime, it shrinks to just 2 people, and the summer, it can hold 20. It's just wonderful. So that house not exactly holds 20, but my sister Kathy and her husband Hub bought a house up the road. So between that house and ours, we can really hold a crowd.
What were some of the activities you did at the colony when you were young?
Well, I don't think I was very active in colony activities, but there was plenty going on at the colony all the time. There would be Sunday services back then, and in what's in the rec hall. That's short for recreation hall. And on Sundays there would be services there, and the men of the colony would take turns leading the service. So about once a summer, it would be my father's turn, or my Uncle Don's turn, or somebody else's, the Brewers or the Dunlaps' turns, and they would put together a simple service, and we would have it was an evening service, early evening service, and we would have that every Sunday in the evening. Did your father take turns doing that too?
I believe my family did also,
Yeah.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
They were called Vespers. It was the
Vesper service, that's right.
Yeah.
And we'd put on plays in the rec hall too, and I remember Auntie Booty, Ruth McCandless, was a wonderful character. She did exactly as she pleased. She would park a car in the road, not at the side of the road, right in the road. She'd stop her car, get out with a basket and cross the field and begin to pick blueberries. And cars would very carefully go around her car. It wasn't quite as hectic then as it is now, and not quite as much traffic. And one year we put on a play, Tom Sawyer. And you remember maybe in Tom Sawyer that there is the scene when they held in the church when Tom Sawyer and his friend Huckleberry Finn are thought to have died, and they're holding a memorial service, and Tom Sawyer and Huck crawl up, and take part in the service. And Auntie Booty, totally unaware of it, came and sat down on the stage next to us on the mourner's bench. It was lots of fun. We liked her very much. She had a Scotty dog, though, that I was afraid of. Not a friendly Scotty.
And there was another wonderful tradition there during the summer, the clam bake. Tell us about that.
Every year, yeah. The clam bake was down in the Grove then. It's inched its way up, and now it's either in the dining hall and right outside. But Gabe would go down into the Grove the night before and start fires. And he'd have a fire pit, and it would be layered, so you'd have the corn and the potatoes, and then a tarp, and the corn and a tarp, and the lobsters and a tarp. And then it was all covered up, and they would steam there for several hours, and then we would have the lobster bacon. It was wonderful. And of course, lobsters were bedded on seaweed, so it just tasted delicious, just wonderful. And the clam bake was a pretty big thing, and it starts with games in mid-morning, And then everyone in those days would go and jump in the pool. And then the kids that is, then you'd get out and you'd go down to the Grove for the clam bake and eat like pigs.
Well, before that, there would be a cocktail party, wouldn't there, in the rec hall? Or was that a later addition?
That may have been a later addition. I don't remember it as a kid, but of course as a child I wouldn't have gone. And then Gabe, you know, it's today you go to the clam bake and you have blueberry cake for your dessert, which is fine. But when we were kids, there were 3 or 4 pies to choose from, plus donuts, and you could stuff yourself to the gills. It was wonderful. You could have several pies and a donut, plus the lobsters you had beforehand and the corn, so you were very well fed.
Now, I know another tradition in the summer was sailing, and your father was a great sailor.
Yeah,
Tell
we
us
loved
about
to
that.
sail. When we grew up sailing, Daddy taught us all to sail. We had a small point boat. Daddy had rented one summer and liked it. The small point class was designed by Starling Burgess to accommodate the more open waters of Small Point, which is the other boundary, the northern boundary of Casco Bay. Casco Bay is located between Cape Elizabeth and Small Point on the northern side, and is the water contained in the bay between those 2 points. And the water's more open at Small Point, so it's a very seaworthy little boat. And there were 5 of them over here at that time. The Dunlaps had one, we had one. The Brewers, let's see, who else?
I think my father had one at one point.
Yep. And he did. And the other one was Alec Williams.
That's right.
Anyway, there were 5 of us. There were enough so that we had our own class of small point boats in the American League Yacht Club races, which we do every Saturday in August. And that was a lot of fun, too. And the races were so casual and so much fun back then. More casual, perhaps. Oh, no, I don't know. Maybe they're just as casual now. But I can remember one time when we were on the small points had a dog called a dogleg course. We went out to a point off Prince's Point on Orr's Island, and then headed down toward High Head, came around a buoy there, and then reversed the course on the way back. And on the way headed down, we were running down. The Brewers were right next to us, and we tossed sandwiches and cookies back and forth between our boats. So it wasn't very tense, it was very casual.
Now, when you got to be a teenager and we're still coming up here, did you ever have a summer job up here?
I didn't. I was one of those, I don't know, maybe it would be called laziness now, but I didn't ever have, when I was in New York, I babysat. But at that time, I didn't have a summer job. I didn't have a serious job ever as a teenager. I didn't start working until I was in college. So high school was footloose and fancy-free. And we'd go to the Grange dances on Saturday. Every Saturday, the Grange had a dance.
Who went to those?
Everybody went to those.
It was a mix of
Adults, teenagers.
summer people, year-round
Summer people,
residents?
year-rounders, exactly. It was a great thing to do. And you went in, they were held upstairs because the dining hall was downstairs. So you went up the stairs, and there would be a small group of 3 or 4 fiddlers playing the music, and we would dance reels. And it was lots of fun. It was not what we think of as square dancing now. It was more perhaps what's called line dancing. But every Saturday, big crowd. It was great fun.
Back when you were a child, can you remember any other characters or local personalities, either in the colony or outside of it, that stick in your mind?
Well, I remember friends, but the big character I remember was the one I told you about,
Okay.
Auntie Booty.
Yeah.
But there was a wonderful, well, we were there less so than now, because back then, of course, the owners came and pretty much stayed. So you had friends that you knew all summer long. And there was quite a group, there was a good-sized group of kids there. All the Estes children, my family, Peter Packard was there. There was a goodly group. We must have had between 8 to 10 kids who played together all the time.
Where were they from?
Well, most of them, of course, the Estes and came from, and the Abbotts came from Auburn. Most of them started out because the Auburn colony started as a group of, but was started in the 1870s by a group of men who wanted a place where their families could come for the summer that would be close enough so that they could come by train and wagon or something to spend the weekends with them and then go back to work, so that they'd come Friday late afternoon or early evening and go back Monday. And that's how it developed and why it was called the Auburn Colony, because the founders all came from Auburn. Maybe a few from Lewiston, but they were grouped in with the Auburn people. And at that time, people didn't rent their cottages. Very occasionally, Grandpa Courier arrived and found a cottage for rent, but most of the people came and stayed. And so you really got to know the people who were there. And the dining hall was designed for the purpose of improving and encouraging congeniality between the householders, the cottage owners, and also so that the women wouldn't have to cook, which I think is a lovely idea, that they were really thinking that the women deserved a vacation too, and that's why they had the dining hall. And so there was a group of people there all the time, and we played and swam. There wasn't a pool at first. You went down to the beach and swam there. And at one point, before they built the swimming pool, they tried to sort of plow out a place at the beach so that when the tide went out, you'd still have water to swim in. It worked sort of, but not very well.
Eventually it filled up.
And then, yes, and then it silted up. And then eventually they built what's now the swimming pool that's there now. The first time they built it, though, they had it, it was filled with salt water. And that didn't last long because salt water destroys pumps in no time flat. So they were constantly replacing the pumps, so it became much easier to revert to fresh water.
I remember as a child that some of the residents at the Auburn Colony came from much farther away, like Dallas and
Right.
New
The
York,
Yanceys
New Jersey.
came from, there was a group of at least 2 families that came from Texas, Dallas, Texas. And of course, my father's family coming from Newark. And when we came from New York. And my cousin Nancy's from New Brunswick, New Jersey. People came from Boston. I think the Brewers came from Boston, their families. So it wasn't just, by the time just before and then starting after World War II, it wasn't just people from Auburn anymore. Mm-hmm. Cottage owners came from all over.
And they still came for most of the summer since they
Yeah,
came.
back then.
Yeah.
You came for the summer and you stayed. And my father was a professor at NYU Medical College and dean of the college So he had a professor's holiday of essentially the summer off, so we could come and stay all summer long.
So eventually you moved back to Harpswell year-round. Tell us about that.
Well, it started with my father. Daddy just loved Harpswell. He adored it. They'd come every summer, and during the summer of 2018, not 1918, the Spanish flu. My father's father, who was also a doctor, went back to see patients, but he wouldn't let his family come back. He told them to stay in Maine at the cottage until he felt it was safe for them to come back to Newark. So my father stayed, I think, until almost November, perhaps, and then they got the word that it was okay to come back. And Daddy used to tell us that, oh, he was so happy there, and he was desolated when he had to leave. And he said he remembered he got into the dinghy for the last time and rowed out toward Bar Island and just sat there and cried because he had to leave Maine and come home. So when he retired, in the year before he retired, he and my mother had the house that we have now winterized, and they moved up here permanently. And that's when he found out that there weren't enough rheumatologists in Maine, and he and my mother started going around to see patients.
And then when did you move here?
Well, of course, I was here every summer, and when my first marriage broke up in 1970, I did not, my husband and I had been living in an apartment in New York City, and while we were in the apartment one night, I woke up and there was somebody else in the apartment with us. So I was making enough noise when I discovered that. I didn't whisper that there was somebody in the apartment. So whoever was in there left. But we could tell because things had been taken out of my pocketbook and things weren't where they ought to have been. Things had been moved around. Somebody was obviously in there looking the place over. So when my marriage broke up, I did not want to stay in a New York City apartment alone. So I came to Maine and got a job teaching at what was then the Harpswell Island School. And Aunt Edith, who was a good friend of Ralph Ulmer, who was the school superintendent then, told me what had happened to me, and I went to see Ralph, and he sent me to Clarence Fickett, and I became a first and second grade teacher at Harpswell Island School. Had a wonderful time. We just had a ball there. It was great. And so at that point, I lived for 2 years at an apartment in Brunswick on Pleasant Street. And then my landlady raised the rent, and Mommy and Daddy said, well, come and live in the wing with us. So I did, and stayed there, and just loved Maine just the way my father had. So I decided to stay in Maine, and I did, until my sister Kathy and her husband were at that time spending years in Saudi Arabia. They'd come home for the summer and go back. And one year my sister said that she was miserable. She was complaining that she was the only member of the family who had no one to spend Christmas, a family Christmas with. So I told her that I didn't have any particular ties. I said, well, I'll come spend Christmas with you. So I took an extra week off from school vacation, and they got me a visa, which at that time it was possible to do. And I went to Saudi Arabia and spent Christmas with them, stayed 3 weeks. And it was fascinating. I'd always wanted to see the Middle East. Went back to when I was in 5th grade at the school I was in, we started by studying the Middle Ages, and then for the second half of the year, we traveled with Marco Polo to China and studied China for the second half of the year.
Okay.
And I wanted to see the Middle East. So I went and I accepted a job with Aramco, and I taught school in Aramco I think I was there for 5 years. And that's where I met my husband, Paul. So when we came home from Saudi Arabia, then I moved with Paul to North Carolina, and we were down there, except for summers, for 26 years. And when I retired, he said, well, you've been down here for 26 years with me. I'll come up and spend some time with you in Maine. So we moved to Maine, and here we are.
Could you tell us more about your time teaching at the Harpswell Island School?
Oh, I had a ball at the Harpswell Island School. It was wonderful. Clarence Fickett was an excellent principal. He was very kind. He was very understanding. He was a good disciplinarian with the students if you had a problem. But he also loved kids, and they knew it. We didn't have very many discipline problems. And he was kind enough to let his teachers, as long as the kids were learning, to let his teachers do their own thing, their own way. There were not as many rules you had to follow then as there are now. So I just had an absolute ball with my classroom.
How did teaching there compare to teaching later in Saudi Arabia?
Well, I think the teaching at our school was very good. One of the things I noticed, I think our students were getting an excellent education. Because of our location, I don't know how many Navy-based students came to the West Harpswell School, but we had quite a few students from Navy families coming in who'd come in from the South. And it was interesting to see that most, not all, but most of those students who came in were well behind our students in what they'd been taught. Most of them were very smart and caught up very quickly. But when they arrived, they were not at the same point in learning that we were when I was teaching first and second grade. They had to do some rapid adjusting when they got here. Compared to Saudi Arabia, when I was teaching there, the main difference was what Saudi Arabia provided. Harpswell Island School was a very good American public school, but you couldn't get everything you wanted. At Aramco in Saudi Arabia, the time I was there in the 70s, the country was saturated with money. Like a sponge that was saturated with water, anything you requested, you got. So it was like a glorified American public school. You carry it to the nth degree, and that's what we had. And we had small classes. I had, at Harpswell Island, so I had smallish classes. I'd have 20, 22, maybe 24 students at the most. At Aramco, a large class was 14 students. So it's the amount of attention you could give students, and with that I had an assistant. You know, it was just a glorified public school education. It was wonderful. And of course the traveling you could do. It was so interesting, and the children were, because of that, more sophisticated. I remember one time we were having first grade, a morning meeting, and a little girl came back with a show and tell, a little house on stilts, and described it. I think it was called, a place called Rose, or Rose Garden in let's see, not Chiang Mai, but it's somewhere in Thailand.
Bangkok, near Bangkok.
Bangkok, yes, thank you, Bangkok. And she was talking to the class about it, and one of the other students said, "Oh, I have a house like that." And another said, "So do I." So I asked my class, "Well, how many of you have been to the Rose Garden?" And half the class raised their hands. That sort of thing doesn't happen in this country. They were a very well-traveled group. They'd sit there and discuss which airline had the best movies. Or things like that. It was delightful. Very childish point of view, but a very sophisticated child's point of view. Very experienced, of the experiences that most American students didn't have. It was fun.
So when you and Paul left North Carolina to come back to Maine, what made you come back here rather than some other place?
Well, Harpswell has been all my life and all my father's life. And going back to the 1880s when Grandpa Currier, or in the 1880s, when Grandpa Currier started bringing his family here. So I didn't know any other place to come. This was Maine for me. And in fact, when I lived here year-round, I first realized how big Maine was. Because when I was living here year-round, I joined AAUW, that's the American Association of University Women. And of course, we would have school meetings around the state. And I got up to Fort Kent. I thought when I was coming here for summers that I'd gotten just about as far north as I could. And it was an education to realize and experience that in Harpswell I was just dipping my toe into the state. I barely got into it. And there was so much north of me.
And I know since you've come back to Harpswell, you've been involved in education in a slightly different way. Tell us about the closing of the West Harpswell School and the Coastal Academy.
Well, the year that I came back to, Paul and I moved here year-round, was one of the years that the debate on what to do with the West Harpswell School was hot. The town of Harpswell, this side of the town at least, certainly, and some support from the other side of the town, the island side, persuaded the Board of Education to keep the West Harpswell School open for another year. But the economics just couldn't support two elementary schools with the student population that we had at that time. So the West Harpswell, and I was very involved. I got interested and involved in that the first year I was here. But afterwards, that school closed. But we thought it was very important that this side have a school too. And I forget now the details, but there was a group that wanted to have a community school here. You have to tell me, because I'm pulling a blank on the correct term for it.
Charter school?
Thank you. A charter school. And so the West Harpswell School was turned into a charter school. And it was a middle school. And still is a middle school now. When then each year they added another year, so they had middle school and high school. And now they have, I think, almost 3 schools, because the first 2 years of middle school are down here. The second 2 years of middle school are up on what I call the base. And the 3 years of high school after that are also on the base.
The former Naval Air Station.
The Naval Air Station, right.
And what makes that school unique?
What
What makes that school different and unique? the subject matter?
Well, I think the subject matter down here, compared to what was, at least used to be, the standard school education, is much more hands-on, much more exploring, using our own environment as a base for learning. Other schools are doing that now. The standard public school is doing much more of that now. But this was a big, much newer idea when the Harpswell Coastal Academy opened than it is now. And it's still very important to them.
I happen to know that another one of your activities is a love of gardening, and you've told us a little about the display gardens of your father's that you're keeping going. Could you tell us more about that, as well as your involvement with the garden club, the Harpswell Garden Club?
Well, I joined the Harpswell Garden Club before I moved to Maine year-round because I do enjoy gardening. And it's a very active, interesting, lively group of people, very, very interesting group of people. So I really value the friendships I've made there and the people that I know. I've missed the fact that we haven't had meetings this year because of COVID-19. We have stimulating, interesting programs, and there are all sorts of knowledgeable people to ask questions of and learn from when you want to do your own gardening. I'm by no means a master gardener. What we're doing now at our house is maintaining my father's display garden. It was Siberians and the daylilies that my father introduced. We want to restore the Japanese gardens that he had for display, but Japanese iris are much more labor-intensive than Siberians. Siberians are tough as nails. Once they get established, they're there. We can look out our kitchen. When my father first started gardening in Maine, summer gardening, he had a patch behind our house that the colony let him create, a garden patch on the colony property that's behind our house. That great big field belongs to the Auburn colony. And he had some iris there and some daylilies. Then later on, as he bought more land in front of us, he created his beds there for hybridizing Siberian and Japanese iris. And the other ones were neglected. But every spring still, there'll be some Siberians that come up and bloom and a clump of daylilies that come up and bloom. Totally neglected for what, almost 40 years now, but they just keep coming up. So they're wonderful plants to have because you don't have to do very much for them. Just give them a place to grow and they'll be happy. And we also now we have only the display garden that's maintained. But there are a couple of patches in his old hybridizing garden, Garden B. We have A, B, and C. A is the display garden. B was Siberians and C was Japanese iris. And in Garden B, there's still some iris that bloom in the corners and a couple of daylilies that bloom there. They get mowed twice a year and that's all.
Going back to the garden club,
Yeah.
I know that does a lot of work around town as well in maintaining different buildings and gardens. Could you tell us about that?
Well, the Garden Club is very active. If you ever get a chance to read their bulletin, their yearbook, and I should have brought one with me to show you, But they started out as a historic garden as well. They started preserving land and gardens around Harpswell. They took it on themselves to do that. When the Historic Society was founded, they've turned some over to them. But the Garden Club maintains the gardens at the Centennial Hall and the Historic Park there. We have some gardens that we maintain, small garden plot at the town office. I'm not sure that we're maintaining, there's a limit to what we can do, so I'm not sure that we're maintaining much else than that. But we have...
Well, you have the Union Church, don't you?
We maintain the Union Church. We own the Union Church and maintain that. The Porters were, your father and mother, were very, very generous, and they held land for the Garden Club. Gave some it to them, and some we sold. So we do have public garden space that we maintain around town, plus our own gardens, and Centennial Hall is a biggie. We have a vegetable garden there, and we have the gardens that there's a little place as you go into facing Centennial Hall on the right, there's a little memorial garden for my father's Siberians. Not the Japanese, because Japanese are very labor intensive. Siberians are a sort of wild iris that grows in fields in northern Europe. Japanese iris are a water plant. It's very interesting. When Siberians multiply, they move outward. You can look at a Siberian plant and tell that it needs to be divided because there's a hollow place in the middle where weeds are coming up. And, the Siberians are all in a circle around the edge of it. And the Japanese iris, they build on top of each other because they're a water plant. And if you don't take care of them and divide them, they'll kill each other off just by smothering the ones underneath them and then getting out of too high up in the air to survive themselves. So they take a lot more work. But you can plant a Siberian iris and just let it alone, and it'll be, as I said, the ones in the field just keep coming up, and they'll come year after year after year with total neglect. They're tough as nails, just the way daylilies are. So they're a very happy plant to have, and they're beautiful when they bloom. So they're a very happy plant to have in your garden. And we don't have to do much except weed.
Yeah.
There's always plenty of that to do.
And didn't you tell me also that there's a move afoot for another garden elsewhere in Maine to...
The McLaughlin Gardens.
Yeah.
Homer McLaughlin was a friend of my father's. He was noted, I think, for his lilacs. I think he had his property. He inherited a sort of farm and turned it into a garden.
Where is that?
In Paris, Maine. And he, I think he may, at one point, had 300 types of lilac there. Different named brands of lilac. And it's now, they're trying to maintain it as a public garden, and they wanted to create a garden there with all my father's Siberians in it. And they're in the process of doing that, but they have to do it a bit at a time. So it's going to be several years before it's finished. They come down and they've dug a few, and this year there have been setbacks and they may not come until the fall, but of course that's a good time to dig anyway. And
before we run out of time, could you talk about your interest in Harpswell's history and your involvement with the Historical Society now?
well, I think Fire Harpswell has a fascinating history. My own family came into it very late, but Harpswell goes back for years and years and years and years into the early 1600s. People were settling here. It wasn't until 1758 that our population got enough here so that we could support a church of our own, which was the measuring point back then. If you could support a church, had enough people to attend and support a church, then you could become a separate town. And in 1758, Harpswell became a separate town. So we've been around for a long time in Harpswell.
What more do you think we could do to preserve our history?
I think it would be lovely if more people were interested in it. So many people now. Well, so many, there's still the families in Harpswell who've been here forever, like Alexander's family and the Dunning families, people like that. But there are also so many newcomers who don't have a feeling for the history or much interest in it. And I think it's important that we support the people who do care, because our history is very interested. I didn't know until I joined this Historic Society, for example, that Shelter Island over on Middle Bay is called Shelter Island because that's where people went when they were afraid of an Indian attack, to get on the island where they'd be protected by water. And there's an island on this side that was used the same way. I forget its name. Anything else I can tell you?
What about COVID-19? You spoke about how COVID-19, you missed the meetings for the garden club, but you are all out there working, so some things are still going on, right?
Well, we've just started working. For a while, things have been neglected. Well, everybody has been housebound with no COVID-19. I think certainly a lot of people, I think, have begun to feel stir crazy.
It's very interesting.
It's one thing to be confined in your house during the wintertime. When the weather begins to get warm up, you want to get outside and you want to mingle. And you were going to say that.
Well, I was fascinated by the fact that you said it was your grandfather, a doctor, who wanted your family to stay up here during the Spanish flu because it was much safer up here than it was in the New York area.
Right.
Which is just the kind of thing we're dealing with today.
Exactly. And I don't know about the island side, but so far as I know, I was checking on the computer. Harpswell, at least the next side of Harpswell, has not had a case of COVID-19. Basically, if you look on the computer, Harpswell does not have any COVID-19 cases. Brunswick has, but we have not, which is water and wind maybe have helped with that.
And tell us about the changes you've seen in Harpswell over the many, many years since you were a child. How is it different?
Well, for one thing, of course, it's bigger. And it's definitely more transient. People come and rent a cottage for a week or two and then leave. They don't become part of the community. It used to be that everybody knew everyone else, and people who came for the summer stayed, most of them, all summer. So I can remember that I had Harpswell friends that I knew and played with all summer long here. And I had New York friends that I knew and played with at school in New York. I don't think that's as true anymore, unfortunately. We have garden club members who are here just for the summer, and then we have the garden club members who are here all year round. That makes our garden club different from many garden clubs that don't have any meetings during the summer because families have traveled away or closed down so they can entertain visiting family members and things like that. I think we're rather unique that way, or maybe Maine is unique that way, in that we have garden clubs that meet all year long, and summertime too. And they're able to do a lot for the community that way.
Well, as we wrap this up, are there any final thoughts you want to leave us with? Why is Harpswell a special place to you?
Well, it's always been a wonderful place for me. It has, as far as I'm concerned, almost perfect weather. I don't even mind the fog. I don't like hot weather, and you very seldom get a scorching day in Harpswell. You may have a hot morning, and then in the shortly afternoon, almost always, you can count on the fingers of one hand the times in a year that the wind doesn't come up in the afternoon. And that's always been true. You get an afternoon breeze, always. Sometimes it's a lot more than a breeze, but I find that very refreshing. To me, it's, since I'm what should I say, I'm a sun-sensitive person. I love the fact that I can go out and garden in long sleeves and a sweatshirt in the summertime, with a hat on my head and not feel uncomfortable. To me, it's a perfect climate. And I like winters, and we have nice cold winters here.
Right.
What could be better?
Right.
Thank you very much, Anne.
You're welcome.
Hey ho, roll and go around Cape Horn to San Francisco. Shantyman, sing, boys, pull on the line, and we're back in record time. Now at Bath down in Maine, they built many tall ships. They were paired up and flanked and launched down the slips. The strength of our nation was built on the pine of the mast trees that harnessed the wind. There were schooners and sloops and all kinds of small craft. There were warships with cannon both forward and aft, and the queens of the seas, downeasters and clippers, mighty proud men were their skippers, with their hey-ho